Hello friends. Let's talk about what is web application architecture, why it is important and what are different type of web application architectures are there. Web application architecture defines the structure, components, and interactions of all elements involved in a web application, including the frontend, which is client-side, backend, which is server-side, databases, APIs, and network protocols. It lays out how the app will function, how data will flow, and how users will interact with it. Web architecture is important because it defines structure, improves scalability, enhances performance, supports maintainability, enables security, improves user experience, supports team collaboration, and guides technology choice. There are mainly 12 web application architecture, which we can decide based on the requirement. These 12 web application architectures are: 1. Monolithic architecture. 2. Two-tier or client-server architecture. 3. Three-tier architecture. 4. Microservices architecture. 5. Service-oriented architecture. 6. Serverless architecture. 7. Progressive web apps architecture. 8. Single-page application architecture. 9. Multi-page application architecture. 10. Jamstack architecture. 11. Event-driven architecture. 12. Edge architecture. Let's understand each of them at a very high level. Later in future, I will explain them in more details. Monolithic architecture. A single, unified application where all functionalities like UI, business logic, database access are tightly integrated into one codebase and deployed as one unit. Basic structure of the monolithic architecture contains single-tiered system, one codebase and single deployment unit. Advantages of monolithic architecture are simple to develop and deploy, easier debugging and testing, and good for small to medium applications. Disadvantages of monolithic architecture are hard to scale specific parts, codebase grows complex over time, and difficult to adopt new technologies. Two-tier architecture divides the application into two parts. One is client, which is frontend, and another is server, which is backend, including database. Basic structure of two-tier architecture contains client, that is UI and presentation logic, and server, that is business logic and database. Advantages of two-tier architecture are better separation of concerns and simple communication over network. Disadvantages of two-tier architecture are scalability is limited and business logic tightly coupled with data layer. Three-tier architecture separates application into three logical layers: presentation, business logic, and data access. Basic structure of three-tier architecture contains presentation layer, that is frontend, which is user interface. Business logic layer, that is backend, which is application logic, and data layer, that is database interaction. Advantages of three-tier architecture are modularization and separation of concerns, easier maintenance and scaling, and technology flexibility. Disadvantages of three-tier architecture are more complex than two-tier and slightly increased latency due to layer communication. Microservices architecture breaks down the application into small, independent services that communicate via APIs, that is typically REST or gRPC. Basic structure of microservices architecture is where each microservice handles one functionality. Services can be deployed and scaled independently and typically use containers like Docker with Kubernetes. Advantages of microservices architecture are high scalability and fault isolation, easier CI/CD and tech stack independence, and better suited for large teams. Disadvantages of microservices architecture are complex to develop, test, and monitor, requires advanced DevOps and orchestration and network latency between services. Service-oriented architecture. Similar to microservices, but typically uses enterprise service buses for communication and may have more centralized governance. Basic structure contains services exposed via standardized interfaces like SOAP, WSDL, and ESB handles communication, orchestration, logging. Advantages of service-oriented architecture are reusability of services, good for integration of legacy systems. Disadvantages of service-oriented architecture are heavyweight due to SOAP or XML overhead and performance bottlenecks with ESB. Serverless architecture uses cloud services to run code on demand in ephemeral containers, that is AWS Lambda or Azure Functions. Basic structure contains no need to manage servers and event-driven, short-lived functions. Advantages of serverless architecture are auto-scalability, cost-effective, that means pay per use, and faster development. Disadvantages of serverless architecture are cold start delays, vendor lock-in, and not suited for long-running tasks. Progressive web application architecture. Web apps that use modern APIs to deliver a native app-like experience via a browser. Basic structure contains service workers, web app manifest, and responsive UI. Advantages are offline access, installable on devices, and fast and engaging. Disadvantages are limited access to native APIs and platform-specific limitations. Single-page application architecture. A web app that loads a single HTML page and dynamically updates content without refreshing the whole page. Batchy structure contains Frontend heavy like React, Angular, Vue.js, and Backend provides APIs like REST or GraphQL. Advantages are smooth user experience and fast transitions between views. Disadvantages are SEO challenges and initial load time might be longer. Multi-page application architecture. Each page is rendered individually by the server and loaded separately. Basic structure contains full reload for every navigation and often traditional server-side rendering. Advantages are good SEO and simple caching. Disadvantages are slower interactions and higher server load. Jamstack architecture. Modern architecture based on decoupling frontend from backend using static site generators, APIs, and CDN. Basic structure contains JavaScript, that is frontend framework, APIs like headless CMS, authorization and markup, that is pre-rendered HTML. Advantages of Jamstack architecture are fast performance via CDN, improved security and developer-friendly and scalable. Disadvantages of Jamstack architecture are dynamic functionality, requires third-party services and not ideal for complex applications out of the box. Event-driven architecture. Application components communicate through events, that is publisher and subscriber model, often uses message brokers. Basic structure contains producers emit events, consumers react to events, and common tools that is used are Kafka or RabbitMQ. Advantages of event-driven architecture are loose coupling, scalability, and responsiveness. Disadvantages of event-driven architecture are complex debugging and monitoring and requires robust event handling mechanisms. Edge architecture moves computation closer to users, that is edge locations, reducing latency and offloading traffic from core servers. Basic structure contains CDN plus edge functions and serverless at the edge. Advantages of edge architecture are ultra-low latency and better resilience and performance. Disadvantages of edge architecture are limited by edge environment capabilities and debugging and data synchronization challenges.